Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, we will go over acceptable identification at the TSA checkpoint. Adult passengers 18 and older must show valid identification at the airport checkpoint in order to travel. This includes driver's licenses or other state photo identity cards issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles or an equivalent agency. Regarding expired ID, TSA currently accepts expired driver's licenses or state-issued IDs a year after expiration. Also, DHS has extended the Real ID enforcement deadline to May 7, 2025. When it comes to children, TSA does not require children under 18 to provide identification when traveling within the United States. However, you should contact the airline for questions regarding specific ID requirements for travelers under 18. I certainly recommend bringing a copy of their birth certificate. If your kid is anything like mine, who looks older than they actually are, you do not want to be held up trying to convince someone how old your kid is. Forgot your ID? Well, even if you arrive at the airport without valid identification because it's lost or at home, you might still be able to fly. The TSA officer may ask you to complete an identity verification process, which includes collecting information such as your name, current address, and other personal information to confirm your identity. If your identity is confirmed, you will be allowed to enter the screening checkpoint. However, you will be subject to additional screening, including a pat-down and screening of carry-on property. Remember, you will not be allowed to enter the security checkpoint if your identity cannot be confirmed, if you choose to not provide proper identification, or if you decline to cooperate with the identity verification process. Names with suffixes. TSA accepts variations on suffixes on boarding passes and ID. Suffixes are not required on boarding passes. If there is a suffix on the boarding pass and there is not one on the ID or vice versa, that is considered an acceptable variation. What is Real ID? Passed by Congress in 2005, the Real ID Act enacted the 9/11 Commission's recommendation that the federal government set standards for the issuance of sources of identification, such as driver's licenses. The Act established minimum security standards for state-issued driver's licenses and identification cards and prohibits certain federal agencies from accepting for official purposes licenses and identification cards from states that do not meet these standards. When will Real ID be enforced? The enforcement date is May 7, 2025. What happens when the Real ID enforcement date begins? Federal agencies, including DHS and TSA, may only accept state-issued driver's licenses and identification cards as identification for purposes of accessing federal facilities, including TSA airport security checkpoints, if the license or card was issued by a Real ID compliant state in accordance with the Real ID security standards. This means the license or card must include the Real ID compliant star marking. Enhanced driver's licenses, or EDLs, issued by Washington, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, and Vermont, are considered acceptable alternatives to Real ID compliant cards and will also be accepted for official Real ID purposes. Most EDLs do not contain the star marking, and this is acceptable. Travelers who do not present a Real ID compliant license or acceptable alternative beginning May 7, 2025 will not be permitted through the security checkpoint. Thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing for more content like this.